Very excited to have a conversation today. I have Patrick Anquetil. He is a PhD, MBA, but he is the Chief Executive Officer at Portal Instruments. Prior to that, he was the former co-founder and director of strategic planning at SnapDX, if I pronounce that correctly, and then extensive engineering or experience in high-tech bioengineering companies, developing business and operational plans, and securing venture capital, and just a fascinating journey. Patrick, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Stuart. Pleasure to be here. Very excited about this conversation. And let's go from there.
So good. I love to start early, and I'm always curious about everyone's journey from, childhood through grade school and into high school. Where did you first become interested in technology, in engineering, and all of that? When did that start for you?
Okay, so engineering, I was also thinking entrepreneurship as well when you were asking the question, because I think to me they're very much intertwined. I always liked to tinker. I always liked technology. I was heavily influenced by my father, who was an engineer. In fact, I remember, when I was like 6, 7 years old, I actually did not understand what an engineer did. I had to look it up in a dictionary, and it was very sort of, foreign. But on the other hand, I always loved to build things. I was into Legos. I was into building mechanisms, from recycling parts, for example. So that was one vignette. The other vignette, I was always fascinated by, stories of people who had started companies. I remember during early years in university, sort of, stumbling upon an article, I think in Forbes or Fortune, about Phil Knight, who is the founder of Nike. And those stories were just incredible because coming out of France, we never heard those. The idea was that you'd do a great school and then you'd get a government job. That was kind of the highest thing you could do. And if you're lucky, maybe that you'd become president. Just the whole French society is kind of a pyramid with a president on top, and everyone does the same school. It has changed nowadays, but back then it was like that. So these are the two vignettes as well. And in addition to that, I was always fascinated by space travel, for example, advanced technology. So all of this kind of led me in the past. Basically, I am today. There's no doubt about that.
So interesting. So because I'm always curious about people's path to entrepreneurship, I had a similar experience where I was just fascinated by people who had started companies. It just seemed foreign to me. And that really sparked with you, even as a student in France. So then you go through your schooling, you get a PhD, you get a master's in business. At what point did you start to see how you're going to fuse your love of technology and business and entrepreneurship into something that would transcend the traditional business world?
It's interesting. So first of all, coming out of France, so I grew up in Paris, basically, and then I went to study abroad at ETH in Zurich, which is kind of like the MIT of Switzerland. So growing up in France, I never thought this would be a story that would apply to me. I always thought, this is someone else's story. And they were maybe very special or they were lucky. So I never thought I had it in me. It was more something that you read about, but was very distant. And there weren't, like today, some role models that were only a few years, ahead of you that did not exist. This was way before the internet and so on. And so for me, I never thought I had it in me, but on the other hand, gradually it kind of built it up. I remember in university, I was already interested in business, how business plans get put together and so on. But also at the same time, I also was someone who never had, sort of like an aha moment, like a great idea. I was very passionate about the market and had found kind of a great way to serve that market. I was just very interested in technology and what it can do and how do you find truth, basically? How do you really design and build based on first principles and so on. So that's something I've always been fascinated by. And when my master's thesis was completed, I couldn't stop, and which is why I ended up doing a PhD afterwards. I feel that my schooling couldn't end there. I had to go beyond. And what I'd heard from others who had done PhDs that were a few years ahead of me is that the PhD really tests your limit in terms of your knowledge, your capabilities, and what you can do basically in science and engineering. So I really loved that idea. So I wanted to try it out. And so that's how I ended up at MIT. And I came at MIT in the early months of 1999, right before, the crazy internet boom, right before Akamai got public, I think sometimes in March or May of that year. These were unbelievable times. AI is kind of fun right now to see it, but yeah, it is not the hype that was back then. If you were an engineer, you were on top of the world. People were like giving you a car if you were joining their company. I mean, it was just a different time, and also something that was no one was accustomed to that before. Right? There was not this appeal for engineering and so on back then. So that's kind of how gradually it built up. But it's not that I woke up one day, I had an idea, and I figured it out. It's sort of, gradually built over time. My first job was in finance, and I got an MBA after that. And then I connected with my mentor, and then we started a company together. That's kind of the step by step. And I'm happy to go into details, but that's how it happened to me.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I think what I notice about your story is you're following your interests, of course, as an engineer, yes. Legos, and with your dad's guidance, of course. You're also interested in entrepreneurship through that Phil Knight story. And he has Shoe Dog is one of the best,
yes.
Business biographies that anyone should read. It's just, you want to know how hard it is to really start your own thing. And so I think you have these as your North Stars, or they're guiding you and pulling you, but it seems like you're also following the currents a little bit, getting to Zurich, then coming to MIT. Talk to me about the leap sort of from being I don't want to say an observer, but you were getting advanced degrees, but that leap from 0 to 1, to coin Peter Thiel's book, or just to look at that leap, go from nothing to something. How was that for you personally? How did you make that transition? Was it through your co-founder? Were you finally just finding an inflection point? Had the market changed, or was it all those things?
Again, it's this very gradual process. I was already, by the end of my undergrad and graduate school in Zurich, already was starting to kind of collect knowledge around, how you start companies, how do business plans get put together, and so on. And then when I came to MIT, similarly, I joined, I had my focus was really on mechanical engineering and robotics, but then I would take business classes like then. But believe it or not, actually, Nubar Afeyan, who is now very famous because he's the head of Flagship and, the chairman of Moderna, I took his class actually at MIT. He used to teach, actually. It was a great class, and, you'd learn a lot from that. And so in those classes, typically, you also get to take an idea and then create a hypothetical business plan around it. And so always collected those experiences. And so when the time came to kind of work on the two opportunities that I had, SynapDX and then Portal, it kind of felt right into place. So with Portal, what happened is that with SynapDX, this was a field study at Harvard Business School, led together with a professor, Bob Higgins. Bob was basically one of the founders of Highland Capital, super active in the field of healthcare investing. So he's asked us to look into autism as an investment field and come up with an investment thesis. And out of that, we concluded, there's not very much going on a therapeutic side. And this is way before the biotech craze that we've seen like in the early 2010s. And so as such, doing a diagnostics might be actually the low-hanging fruit. And so we did a market study on this. It was very clear that there was a need for it, but we couldn't find the technology. And then, fast forward a few months, then Bob basically introduces me to my mentor, Stan Lapidus. Stan is very famous, kind of the legend in diagnostics. He started Cytic, Exact Sciences, Helicos, and then SynapDX we did together. And so we kind of got paired together. There's a third guy came in, the three of us then went out and looked for technology for about a year and then built the company from there. And then similarly with Portal, I knew the inventor because he was my PhD advisor. And he thought the tech was ready for prime time, which of course it was. This is the typical, sort of academic, research, getting into the real world type situation. But then there was enough interest from a couple of pharmaceutical companies, in particular from Sanofi, to fund a company. And I was kind of the right guy at the right time to do that. And that's kind of how those things happened as well. So there's a bit of serendipity combined with kind of building knowledge over time and then recognizing an opportunity and then just going for it.
And I mean this is a high compliment because I love your story, but it's almost like you're an accidental entrepreneur. Not that you didn't want to be, and you are, but it seems like it was something that was a faraway dream as a younger person in France, and then through your persistence and your efforts, you put yourself in the right situation. And then all of a sudden these opportunities appeared. Looking back now, do you feel like you could have sped up that journey for you? Or are you happy with how it has sort of found its way to you? Because you seem to be always interested in what you've been doing. So
for me, the process was different, and I think it'd be different for someone else. For me, there was no opportunity that was kind of self-evident, even during the internet boom years, actually, as well. I was part of it. I was actually writing business plan, but none of them really were like a no-brainer, actually, as well. So I was very long-term committed, I guess, because I did collect the vignettes and the knowledge and the network actually as well. I was super network actually, but at the early 2000s, it was pretty amazing. But again, the opportunity did not present itself right away. And I think for others that are maybe more fortunate, let's say, let's call it this way, where it's very crystal clear to them, what the opportunity is, where the market is, and then they go out and find the tech or the solution for it. That for me was a bit different. It was kind of the reverse one, which is it's not bad, but it's less ideal in that you got some cool tech and you're trying to find a market for it actually as well. And so that's kind of the process by which it happened for me.
Right. So instead of market need and a product fit,
Yes.
you were sort of product focused, looking for a market, right?
That's right. Yeah, and I think again, I don't think there's anything bad about it. I do think it's better if you know the market. I mean, it's undoubtedly, but it's not that you are at a significant disadvantage if you start from the technology actually as well. In fact, for me, that's what I found the most appealing. It's kind of creating something out of nothing on the market side, right? And so it's very appealing, and you have to also look at it as an amazing opportunity because there's a lot of research in academia that just doesn't make it to the marketplace. And it's not that it's bad research, there's just no market for it, or it hasn't been created, right? And so I think it's great to have people who actually look at the problem from that side. And I think it's a good service for society because otherwise it's R&D dollars that just, they're not wasted because the knowledge is still there and published upon, but it's not maybe the most optimal way to do it. Yeah.
So talk to me about portal instruments. Obviously this is focused on injections and really ensuring that you're changing the stigma and the fear around people having injections. Could you explain the 30,000 foot view of what Portal Instruments is doing and what the technology is all about?
Yeah, sure. So with Portal, there is really the opportunity to transform the way injections are performed. The needle and syringe, the hypodermic needle, is a 150-year-old technology. It kind of hasn't changed during that time. And what's fascinating about it from a tech and kind of application perspective, it works actually really well. I mean, there's nothing wrong with a needle and syringe, but for that, it's a little bit unsafe and people hate it, right? And so that to me created really an opportunity to disrupt that. And you have to believe that in the future, there won't be any needles and we'll have something that's a little bit better. That's also not analog. I mean, taking a pill or taking a drug, through a syringe, like one of the weight loss drugs, for example, that's very famous these days. These are all very analog sort of experiences, right? There's nothing digital about taking a pill. And I think there's a bit of a missed experience or missed opportunities there as well, because unlike having food, which is also very analog actually as well, there you've got a whole care team that actually does care for you, and there's cost associated with that. And so wouldn't it be great if you actually facilitated the administration of medicine and not only help the patients in kind of doing it right and doing it at the right time, but also if you kind of provided context to them, support, an indication as to how well they're doing on the therapy and so on. I think there's a lot of opportunities with a device that's less analog, easier to use, needle free, because there's really nothing that's going to poke you if it's needle free. There's truly opportunities there to create those feedback loops, and I think we should see better outcomes, for the patient, for the group of patients, and then for society down the road by creating those feedback loops all along. So that's kind of the vision with Portal. At the same time, it is challenging because you are disrupting something that medically is just fine. I mean, it's very efficient. It's just very unsafe, and then people hate it. So I've got the device here if you want to have a quick look at it. So this is what it looks like. This is the reusable part. It's got basically, if we turn it on, it's got a cartridge door that opens where you can put the container. So right here. Yep. And then the cartridge is actually quite interesting. It is shaped like a pre-filled syringe, like this guy here, but it has no needle. It just has this cone that creates the closure. And then here there is a very fine orifice that creates a jet that's about maybe like a third of the smallest needle that you typically use to inject medicine. So it's almost like a virtual needle, and the injection happens very, very fast. And that jet basically gently pierces the skin, and the device itself controls that experience all along. So a whole injection, like taking a vaccine that may take a few seconds, we do it like in a fraction of a second. It's over before you even realize, and it's pretty much almost sensation free. And it's very, very you feel like a tickle And we've published studies actually on that along the way. It's just a transformed experience. And so the challenge is actually not on the technology side. It's more on the business side. Who's going to pay for that technology and how you're going to introduce it to the market? That's, I think, actually where most of the challenges are, believe it or not.
So let's talk about the technology and then the challenges. So help me understand just a technical level, what is happening to allow your technology to deliver the medication without piercing the skin the way a needle does? Of course, it's going through the skin, but how does it work?
So yes, what you do, you compress the drug and then you let it through a very small orifice. When it comes out of that orifice, it actually travels at a very, very high speed, almost like at the speed of sound. And then because it's very small and very collimated, there is nowhere to go for it, but to kind of gently kind of push the skin away. And then once it enters tissue, it gets slowed down by the tissue that it sees, like by the skin and then by the subcutaneous fat that's underneath it. And so that's kind of how it works. It sounds almost like out of Star Trek. And in fact, it's been around for some time. But really, what the MIT technology allowed us to do is not only to shape the jet, but also to control it over time, meaning that we can adjust it during the injection process and make it a very, very consistent and very reliable injection along the way.
Okay. And so, yeah, it seems like it shapes the fluid into sort of a micro needle that can,
exactly.
Translate.
You got it. Yeah. That's exactly that. Yep.
Very interesting. And of course, much more appealing, right? I have 2 little kids, and every time the only trauma we've really had over the last few years has been, getting their shots. And it's just it's a terrible experience for any parent, but it's also, of course, a stigma and a fear for many patients with anything they have to inject. So let's talk about your challenges then in the market. You said, who's driving this? And I work with many companies in biotech and life sciences where is this going to be driven by patient demand? Is this driven by the healthcare providers? Is this, who's driving demand? And so where has been your focus with Portal Instruments?
So when we get the technology out of MIT, the challenge that we had was that the tech was extremely broad. You could inject anything, anywhere, anytime, but not necessarily all those embodiments were, made business sense. And so we really had to take a step back and understand, where's the value, like in an absolute basis, and also where's the value relative to a needle and syringe, where we're going to be competing with something that at best or at most is 10 cents per injection. I mean, it's really, really small. And so we recognize then from there, so the work that we've done, and again, it took some time. It's not that it was like we woke up one day and we figured it out, but we realized that actually there was a whole class of medicines that actually not only were very valuable, where, one, this is just water in this cartridge here, where on average, if this was a drug, this would be $1,000 per dose. Number one. And so these are all the biologics basically fit within that, like antibodies or monoclonal antibodies, therapeutic proteins, peptides, and so on. So number one, a lot of value is there. And then moreover, those medicines were used to treat chronic diseases. And with a chronic disease, that means that the fact that the device is reusable becomes very attractive, because then you can take the capital cost associated with it and spread it over many injections, and as such really reduce the cost per injection. And so that was the first observation. And then the second observation was to understand, well, but who's got the money actually? So it's not the patient. A patient never has the money, also doesn't want to pay basically for healthcare. The physician, I think it's more complicated. There is an in-office device that we could do, but we haven't actually figured out. I think it will happen later on. It becomes very valuable if all the medicines can be injected in that way. It turns out that from a regulatory perspective, we need to revalidate the injection process for each drug. And so it's going to take some time to have an offering that can really cover, 80% of all the drugs getting injected in the office. But on the other hand, for biologics like, Ozempic, Wegovy, Humira, all those like amazing, big class of drugs, it turns out that because of their composition, I mean, they're sort of large molecule type products. Because of that, they actually tend to be not only high volume to get the therapeutic dose, but also higher viscosity than water. And oftentimes, the patient actually doesn't have enough force in their thumb to perform the injection. And as such, they get augmented by devices like I have one device here, by those devices called auto-injectors or EpiPen. It's the same technology. It's basically a syringe that's in there, like our syringe that's here. But then there's a spring in the back that augments the patient. And also because there's a device around it, you can hide the needle. You just actually don't see the needle, which again in studies patients prefer because it's a bit less daunting actually as well. So already there was the right setup, the right environment that was very conducive to introduce now a better device. And that's what we've done. So our business model is to basically partner with therapeutics company, biotech, pharma companies, where they've got a drug that's in a difficult market where they need to differentiate. And that's where working with us becomes actually very interesting because we've got a lot of patents. You can see some of them, in the back actually on the wall right here. And suddenly they can be the only game in town for that therapeutic area that's got a needle-free embodiment. Oh, and by the way, because it's computer controlled, it's also very easy for us to connect it. And as such, you can really get enhanced therapy management where you can guide the patient, track their medicines, and then help them basically, with kind of their daily life and what it means to take the therapy, at the same time. So that's kind of what we operate in.
So it seems like you've been finding that right partner so that it's a value proposition to both sides, that you stand out for them and they stand out for you, and together it's a huge value offering. Is that
exactly
accurate?
You got it.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. And so talk to me about so Portal Instruments, of course, has been in existence for how long now?
It's been about 10 years, actually. So those things take time. Yeah. And I can kind of describe to you what we've done and so on along the way. Yeah.
So talk to us about the journey. And then I also want to talk about, team building and finding the right people
that's great. Yep.
Yeah, please.
Great topic. So the genesis of Portal was that we were going to basically partner with Sanofi and create a platform technology for them. And the equity holders in the company. And by the way, the funniest thing is the following. So by then, I had been 3 years at SynapDX. We were planning for a clinical study. The study was planned. There was really actually no need for the business guy anymore, which is that was the right time for me to jump over. And at the same time, that technology had been sponsored by Sanofi at MIT. And there had been, I think, 11 research projects actually done that all were successful. And so they had a very keen interest to fund the company around it. And so here's what's interesting. For me, as still a young guy, I thought, this is amazing. I'm going to raise $20 million in 2 months, and we're going to get going. I get the method from Stan, from Stanley Peters. He kind of taught it to me. I'm just going to replicate it, what we've done at SynapDX, and just apply it to Portland. It's going to be great. It's going to be less of a pain than starting SynapDX. SynapDX, just so the audience knows that, even with the dream team, I mean, we had Stan, we had Jeff Luber. Jeff was the CEO of Exact Sciences, so super accomplished. And then me, I was just kind of the junior guy. So we ended up getting amazing investors. We had amazing clinician. The tech came out of Luke Kunkel's lab. Luke Kunkel discovered the gene of muscular dystrophy. I mean, not a pound Caesar, like a major thing. So even with all of that, it took us a year to basically raise money, right? So it just takes time. But nonetheless, in my mind, I thought, okay, well, here's Sanofi's interest. It's really good. $20 million in 2 months. Actually, it took a year and a quarter, and I only raised half, and Sanofi only gave a third of that half. I had to find 2 other investors to get to the $11 million Series A. So I think those things are easy. And, you hear a lot of, all the glamorous, success story and so on. Oftentimes they're actually over focusing on the good side, not the bad side. And I think those things take time. And there's this guy, Scott Belsky. I think he's written a book. I forgot what the title is, but basically the premise is that, you think that, well, the whole process of entrepreneurship is like a hockey stick. Like you get to a hard point and then you kind of overcome it, and then it's glory, and then, product is successful, you make millions and so on. This is actually not true. It's a lot of micro or macro ups and downs all the time. And in fact, it's a little bit, a little bit stressful to be on a high, because from experience that it's just not going to last. Something's going to happen tomorrow. You're going to have to, it's going to be a big letdown. And that's the journey. And I think what's interesting with that, people who do well tend to be very resilient. And they're also problem solvers actually as well. And I think that's what I find is very exciting. And I think we, as entrepreneurs, also as engineers, but not just engineers. I think as entrepreneurs, we are problem solvers at heart. And, you want to talk about the team. The team is like another thing that you're trying to problem solve actually as well. So anyway, I probably digress a little bit, but I think the point here is that it's not easy. And so with Portal, it really took a long time to do that. The tech didn't work initially. We had Sanofi build out. I mean, it was like a lot of like after and so on. I think here the trick is that you wake up in the morning, you dust yourself off, and you go back at it. And that's just a journey. And I think it's this managing oneself. I think is probably the most important thing and the most important story to hear, because this is not the Instagram vignette, 5-second, video. Oh, everything is great. No, it's a labor of love, I would say. And you have to be able to just really not feel overwhelmed and depressed by that. In the end, it's going to work out.
Right. I mean, solving a hard problem over a sustained period of time is hard. There's no glamour to it. It's just you have to believe in what you're doing. There's a mission, there's a purpose. If you're lucky enough, you get some tailwinds, but wherever you are, don't believe it, because you're going to be, the next day is a new day. I'm curious, though, a lot of my focus with my clients is on effective communication. And the reason I've found that this is so important, especially with new ventures is because when you finally are onto something that's unique, you have to be good at articulating the value clearly and consistently. And so a lot of people who are in science or tech fields spend a lot of time looking vertically at models and looking at research and looking at all kinds of ways. But then ultimately, if you're lucky enough to try to bring this to a market, to patients, you have to kind of think more horizontally. I want to talk about your experience in raising funding. There's tough times, of course, and you raise as much. But when you're thinking about articulating the value of what you're doing, what has been or what's been your approach to be ultimately successful at raising capital? And there's no one way to do it.
No, it's true. I think it's really an art form. You cannot learn it from a book. You have to learn by doing, and by doing it a lot, actually. That's the way it works. I think first of all, it comes in how you position the value prop, actually, is very, very important. And I think this is where engineers, by and large, are a bit at a disadvantage, because I think for most people, including me, the basic business side gets actually overlooked. And even the basic business equation, right, which is that we got a product, there's a market, we're going to make X product at that amount and sell it for, that Y amount. And then, the Y minus the X gives you the profit. You wouldn't believe in all the business plans that I read, how often that gets actually overlooked. People get enamored with the tech, and the tech's going to solve everything, but they forget oftentimes the economic position of that. And I think here a great fundraising at the end of the day needs to clearly articulate not only the value prop of the problem, but also how is this investor going to make money in X amount of time, or conversely, what are the milestones along the way to create value that will enhance the value of the company, and as such, will benefit investors too. So I think that part is number one. And just always look at it. Okay, forget about the tech. The tech actually always works typically. What's harder is there willingness to pay for the product, right? Is it really creating a strong value prop where it becomes indispensable to the user, or is it a commonly acknowledged problem for which you really provide a solution that no one else can do? So I think that's number one. Number two, it has to be a market that's at least big enough. Typically, the market is to be at least $1 billion market, because other than that, it's just very niche and can be just as painful, but just with smaller market. And then number three, you also need very clearly defendable intellectual property, right? So not just patents, but also maybe a process, or maybe the team actually might be what's differentiated as well. So all those three things, the big market, clear value prop, or key differentiation actually, and then defensible IP. Those three things actually are really what's required for at the minimum for basic great fundraising. And then you get into the more sort of subtlety. I think the next one is, the fourth one would be the team. I think if you can be self-aware enough to understand where your limits are and what you're good at and what you're not maybe good at as well, and find people, team members that complement you, that becomes immensely powerful, right? Because effectively, you have the crucible for the optimal team, which is a team of people who have a similar interest, but might be very different from their background, from their skills, from their outlook, and so on. And then as you think of team, you need to, in particular in our world of medtech, biotech, then you need to actually broaden it up to the field, right? To the therapeutic area that you're in, understanding what are the major advances that were made? Who are the key opinion leaders today? What do they think? I think it's good to have them tell you what's good, what's bad, and then to be humble enough about that and so on. So I think those things are really what really captures an investor's imagination. And then it's a match question, right? Is it an area that they're particularly interested in, or are they looking at another company or another in the same field, or are they looking at just completely different fields because this is not what they're doing? So I think it's a lot of little things. But if this is a great business and the team is good and it's an amazing market, I mean, that should get funded. I mean, but oftentimes it's not as crisp, it takes time and so on. Yeah.
Yeah. So talk to me about, what culture means to you at Portal and finding the right people and then cultivating that, because finding good people and the right fit is extremely challenging. And of course, keeping people happy as the company evolves,
Yes.
as things change.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
tell me about your experience with creating that and being a part of that culture.
I think culture is really, really hard, actually. I think the bigger the company goes, the more, it's really a labor of love. You have to really go at it day in, day out. I mean, we talked about communication. One of my other mentors said, well, no one's ever been blamed for over communicating. And that, on the other hand, doesn't come naturally, I think, at least to me. It's really, again, this labor of love. You have to be intentional and mindful and remember to go at it basically every day. So I think that's the first observation. Second of all, I think the culture inherently starts with the individuals basically in the top management, right? So not just the CEO, but I think the executive team certainly as well. And it's really around, what are the common values that we have, that we believe in, that will basically, strengthen our ability to meet our objective, to reach our mission and so on. And I think you have to be concise and clear about things that you will do and things that you will not do actually as well. What I think that you promote. So for us, actually, there's a broad set of values that we have, but the key one are around innovation, curiosity. The one I'm very, very adamant about is teamwork, and I call it collegiality. We're all colleagues at the end of the day. We're spending more time amongst colleagues than we do with our loved ones, our kids, our spouses, our partners. I think, therefore, for me, it's always been very, very clear that we need to create an environment where people feel valued, people feel respected, and where they want to spend the time and do their best work. And I think this idea that you're going to have a culture of, there's management, there's employees, and, I'm the manager, you the employee, you do what I say. I mean, this is not going to work. In fact, the other thing the team hears from me all the time, as a startup, you have very few advantages, actually. I mean, oftentimes you have an unproven technology in an unproven market with, by the way, an unproven team as well. So, and you're going to make mistakes, and that's just totally fine. But you have to understand that the only advantage you have is speed. If you can move faster than the incumbent, then you can actually make more mistakes, and you can actually conversely iterate and progress faster actually as well. The master of this, by the way, I know it's a bit controversial these days, but if we forget the controversy, is really Elon Musk. I mean, he's shown how you can really outcompete giants like Boeing, for example, with regards to rockets, like all the top 10 car companies with regards to Tesla. I mean, it's unbelievable. And all of this was achieved by assembling amazing teams, like the best of the best. And I think he really has a talent for that. And then competing on time. That's the winning formula. Everything else is just harder.
So speed as a competitive advantage.
100%. Yep. And so the way we've set up the company is actually quite interesting, is that we've set it up such that we've actually overinvested in tools to equip the engineers to do their best work. At our facilities, we have fabrication, machinery, rapid prototyping tools, such that the engineers can really be creative. And so I'll give you the example. So imagine that you're an engineer, you got to design a part. If you know that part may take a couple of weeks to get manufactured and to come back to you, you're going to be a bit more conservative. You're not going to try too many crazy ideas that you may have, right? What if, on the other hand, you can design it in the morning and then go downstairs and make it? And as you make it, even observe how it's getting made. And imagine now that cycle is one day instead of 2 weeks. I mean, you're going to try most things and it's compounding. And actually what's so interesting, and just remember this now, it's hard for engineers to understand, at least the one, from when we started the company, that generation, that engineering is highly iterative. And I think the education, at least from, 10 years ago, let's say, because I don't know how it's evolved actually now, but 10 years ago was really, engineers want perfection. You're graded on your ability to get it right. And this idea that you make mistakes, that you learn from building and testing, that was really, really hard for some of our engineers. Because again, they want perfection and just don't want to look bad. And so creating that culture again, that tolerates mistakes, that assumes that we're not going to get it right the first time, but we're going to do our best. And we're going to learn, most importantly, from what we've built. And we're going to make sure that our iteration cycles, get as fast as we can, then we can only win, right? I think that's kind of what also culture means to us as well.
Well, that's a huge one because in many companies, you get to where you are because you're the best in your class and you're the best and you're the best. So you're always celebrated for your successes. Nobody puts their failures on a resume. And then you get into an environment and people say, you're not being judged on your failures, but secretly they are. So a lot of people get gun shy and they'll say, well, I'm only going to submit ideas that I can get behind. Otherwise, I'm going to zip it. And it seems like you're really adamant about not just giving the rhetoric to say, we want you to fail and fail fast and try things out, but here are the tools to do that so that you can get more cycles and reps in so that 2 weeks can be literally, if you work every day, it can be 14 cycles of failure and improvement.
That's right.
So you're just going to go exponentially faster.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I think accepting that there is multiple tries, right? Like you can really try a few things. I mean, there are limits obviously within that. I mean, it's, we have to be also careful not to be, too academic about it, where it doesn't matter, there's no, economic pressure there as well. But I do think creating an environment where, where it's okay to make mistakes. I mean, I'm very clear and talk about it when I made a mistake. Look, this is a miss on my side. It's clearly on me, So I'm very, very clear at communicating that. Secondly, we never critique someone in a full group and shame them. I mean, that's horrible. Maybe it was great 20 years ago, but nowadays this has no place actually, and it's not constructive. In the end, you're weakening one of your most precious assets, which is the team, right? You're weakening not only the individuals, but now you've created with everyone that's out there kind of a climate of fear. It just doesn't work. And I think in particular, this newer generation is very, very sensitive to that as well, which is wonderful. But I think there's things that we need to be very, very clear about. We need to be respectful to each other. It's okay, on the other hand, to disagree. I mean, I think we love disagreement because at the end of the day, it means that is from that friction, we both learn something from each other. I think it's, again, if it's done properly, I think it's great to have different views, because otherwise it means that one of us is just not needed.
Right.
If we agree on everything, we just don't need me, maybe. So that's right. Again, I think culture is very, very clear. If you've asked people, I think most people really like the culture here. I think it should be our proudest achievement. For me, it comes very natural, I think, and I don't want to kind of pat myself in the back on it, because I do think, again, it's a labor of love, and we can always do better, actually. And we have to constantly over communicate. And as we grow and bring in more people, it becomes, again, more complex, and we need to over communicate on that and make sure that people feel comfortable and so on, and heard, of course, as well.
Right. Well, to do great things, you have to have at least two components, which is you have to hold yourself to high standards, but you also have to believe that you're safe in your ability to take risks. And when you have those two, then people do amazing things if they feel safe to take risks. So two final questions for you. The one is, I love your transparency because you are a real person. You talk about the ups and downs and the realities of it. Are there any, I don't want to call them failures, but setbacks or challenges that you really felt like at the time maybe were extremely painful, but in the long run, they actually helped you win more and succeed more because you could compound the learnings?
It's interesting. I think you always learn from those challenging situations. You just don't realize it in the moment. And it's as you described, extremely, extremely painful. I'm trying to think about a good example that we've had. I mean, I think one of them in the early days, we had a partner that basically dropped us out of nowhere, and we had to downsize the team because that project was literally canceled one day to the next. And I think that's one of the challenges with pharma is that, that can happen. And they pay very well, which is nice. But on the other hand, it can just disappear. And so that was extremely, extremely painful in the moment. But at the same time here, what we thought is, let's first of all make sure that everyone's taken care of, that we treat people well, that we really go overboard to make sure that they find a home somewhere, that we had like a resume book that we did, we over communicated, and I think in the end everyone understood it was a sad time, but on the other hand, everyone landed actually on their feet afterwards. And in fact, believe it or not, two folks we ended up hiring back. And we were very clear, look, it's not that our prospect changed dramatically, but nonetheless, we really value you and we'd love to have you come back. And both came back, actually. The two, in two instances where we needed basically those people back, 4 or 5 months later, they actually came back. So I do think, being respectful, being a mensch, like a true human being, and understanding that we can only be stronger together. And that's the only way that humankind has achieved things, by teaming up, and recognizing that I think it does pay dividend in the long term. And to me also, it's very important that the reputation of the company is strong. You don't want to, you don't want to have people say, "Oh, yeah, it's horrible to work there." I mean, I would hate that. There is no time for basically in a startup environment, right? It's already so hard because the market is tough, and the competitors are better funded, all that stuff. So you got to make sure that all the bullshit gets taken out, and it's so easy to do. Just leave the ego at the door. You have good values, like what your mom or your dad, would have taught you, and you should go from there. I mean, it's very simple if you think of it. And I just pay dividend. I do a test, yeah.
So last question for you. How do you balance looking at the short and medium term versus keeping your eye on a vision and ensuring that you're responding to changes in the market? How do you make that balance between those two perspectives?
I think that's actually an amazing question. I think it's very, very hard. I do think it starts with self-awareness. I think the job of a CEO, even though he or she can do all kind of the minute tasks, is actually not to do those. It's really to, first of all, of course, find a great vision and, in a strategic direction, or at least catalyze it, then hire a team to do that, and then let them run, and then kind of clear out sort of the hurdles that come along. That's really what the job is. And of course, fundraising and all that stuff. So I think in that context, what's interesting is that it's easy for doers. And I think I'm kind of like that. I thrive on, like doing stuff, and achieving and so on. It's hard not to get caught into that and wanting to do someone else's job, basically. And I think this is, we were talking about Dan Martel before the interview. I think that's really where he's been very, very clear about that, right? That if you're doing someone's job, then you just don't need them, so just don't hire them. Right? And I think that's how, in the end, that team helps you focus actually on the long term. So I think that's one way. The other way is also to find some time in your schedule. Unfortunately, it's actually quite easy to think about those things. What's the best way to do it? Well, you go to conferences. And I think conferences are a great opportunity not only to, showcase what you've done, meet new people, but also you're in a different environment. You travel to get there. Oftentimes the Wi-Fi doesn't work on the airplane, so you really have time to think. And I think that's what I found has been very helpful to travel to conferences, or even to travel to see customers actually as well. That can give you a little bit of more perspective than trying to tame some fires that are happening in the office and so on. I think for a great leader, the team should be running on their own. And so, in fact, what Stan, Stan Lapidus, my mentor, would say is that, look, if you're doing a great job as a CEO, you have nothing to do. Everything's taken care of. And so, of course, it never happens, but that's kind of what you're striving to accomplish, or to get to.
And you have to be someone different than maybe your natural strengths are. If you're a born and bred engineer, if you like tinkering, you may want to get your hands involved with projects, but it may not be the best use of your time and energy to grow the company.
I think it's hard for people who have are liking kind of that kind of word to work, to sort of dissociate themselves a little bit from it, and to really trust the team at the end of the day, right? And so, and I have to say, particularly for PhDs that are trained to be really like army of one, to do everything, to understand everything, to go from A through Z. of a project or a bigger project. It's actually something that doesn't come natural because you've been trained exactly in the opposite way, right? And so that's something I found very strong.
You have to trust. Well, Patrick, this has been a fascinating conversation. Where should people go if they want to learn more about Portal Instruments, your journey, or just to stay in touch?
Yeah, I think the easiest way, so the company's website obviously is easy to find, portalinstruments.com. The easiest way to reach out to me is through LinkedIn. I do look at my messages, and if they're thoughtful, I will respond to them. In other words, if they're not, just spam. Yeah, it's super easy to reach. I love mentoring. I think it's I was just thinking actually about this morning. I do think the world always needs role models and people basically to help the younger generation and so on, because we didn't get there on our own, right? I mean, it's with a lot of learning, with a lot of support, and I think it's just something that I found very, very rewarding. But also, I learned a lot. Actually, I learned a lot from younger folks, and what their struggles are and what their point of view is as well. I think that's something I found very enriching actually as well. So yeah, please do reach out and look forward to find out more.
Yeah, Patrick, this is fascinating. I so appreciate your time and energy and just your enthusiasm for working on hard problems over time with good people. What better way to have a rich and rewarding life? So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Stuart. Great being there. Great question. Great interview. Really enjoyed it.
All right, great.